Joystick Gremlin is really important part of my Star Citizen setup at the moment, and just a while ago I promised to make a video how to set it up. So this video will be a basic overview of Joystick Gremlin, what it is, why some people actually want to use it, how to set it up, and few useful use cases for you to try out. And while my main focus is Star Citizen, most of the stuff in this video will be applicable to any other game too. Okay, let's start with the basics. What is this miracle software called Joystick Gremlins? Well, let's imagine this scenario. You're right on the tail of your enemy, pulling your stick hard, squeezing the trigger, and about to blast your enemy out of the game. What happens in that case? Well, just oversimplify things. Whatever you're doing with your physical controller is sent to the game, and then based on your bindings, that stuff happens in game. That's quite simple, isn't it? Well, now comes the Joystick Gremlins. It's basically a software that also listens to your key presses and stuff that you do with your physical controllers, but instead of passing them to the game or to the system right away, you can actually define yourself that what's going to happen. For example, you can have it control a virtual joystick, which is, as the name implies, a joystick that doesn't exist, but the game sees it as a controller. You can have it control, just kind of pass a key press. So instead of when you're pressing a key or pressing a button on your joystick, it actually sends a specific key press to the game. So you could actually, for example, use the default key bindings of the game in few cases. And there are a lot of things like curves, modes, and macros and stuff like that you can do. And after those modifications, it sends that stuff to the game. Well, as we can see, there's already one issue at the play here. The game gets two key presses. Let's say that I configure my joystick to press the first button on the vJoy, a virtual joystick. Then the game would get the key press from the physical controller and another key press from the vJoy. And while Joystick Gremlin actually has few possible or one tool to actually fix this, the best way is somehow just to hide the physical controllers from the game. Before with Star Citizen we used a software called Dev Reorder, which was a great software, but for some reason it doesn't work with the easy anti-cheat. So currently we're using HidHide. So here we can see that's basically a setup of three software. You have the Joystick Gremlin, you have the virtual joystick vJoy, and HidHide. And as you can imagine, this can be quite a hassle in some cases. So why to go through all this? Well, the first thing is make stuff work. For example, I started my journey with a bit more complicated setups with Star Citizen by buying the old Logitech or Cytec heavy equipment panel. And it was a nice panel, not worth the price, but okay panel. But the issue was that it didn't work with Star Citizen right away. Or Star Citizen didn't recognize that controller. So I actually had to learn to use the Joystick Gremlin, which in the hindsight is a great thing to make it work. In some cases, you might want to divide your controllers. I don't know what's the situation at the moment, but at some point, for example, Elite Dangerous only allowed 32 buttons per controller. So in that case, you might actually want to divide one physical controller into two separate vJoy controllers. Or use the key bindings right away. Then you might also want to combine controllers. In some cases, for example, Star Citizen still mixes up the order of your controllers occasionally. So let's say you have two joysticks, you can actually assign both joysticks into one virtual controller and don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Or in a few cases, the latching switches / buttons that I have here. So that's kind of specialty that I'm going to go through a bit later. Next thing are different setups. So let's say that you have set up 3 or 4 different vJoy joysticks and keep those things on all the time. You can mix your physical controllers all you want here and even Star Citizen won't be bothered with it as long as you get the vJoy controllers on all the time. So in that case, you can have different profiles for different games. And the final thing, we know that kind of Star Citizen has few issues with the controllers, and I'm expecting that CRG will come to fixing them at some point. But even if they fix them, there are still some finer controls that Joystick Gremlin gives you, like adjusting the curves, creating macros, adjusting curves, adjusting different modes, or other fine tuning. So it's kind of really powerful software once you get really into it. To get started, you need to install 3 applications, and I have the links in the description. The Joystick Gremlin, the vJoy, that's the virtual joystick program, and the HidHide, that actually hides the physical controllers from your software. And once you're done with the installation, you can actually start with configuring them. Okay, let's start with the vJoy devices. Once you have installed vJoy, this is the configuration screen that you get when opening the application. And as you can see, you can have a total of 16 different controllers. So just go to the controller, click Add Device, and once you have added it, just configure what you want to have in the device. For example, if I would like to use this with my Virpil Constellation Alpha joystick, I could have X and Y axis, just the basic movement axis. I'm not using Z axis because I have the twist axis locked, but you could use that one also. These RX and RY axis are something I could use with the small thumb joystick that it has. And the slider is something that I could have with the paddle, for example. Then the number of buttons, in my case, I actually also have the Virpil control button number 2 configured this, so I just have many of buttons. And if you have hat switches, you could also control those. So once you have configured everything and make sure the vJoy is enabled, you can just close this one. And the great thing here is that if you keep the vJoy on all the time, Star Citizen won't most likely mix the order of those devices. It can do it occasionally, but it's quite rare. Okay, next we're going to configure the HidHide, software that hides the physical controllers. First, you want to go to Devices tab here, and just make sure that all the virtual joystick devices are not locked, so there's no red lock icon, and all the devices that you want to hide from your computer and from your games have the lock icon. That's all. And in the applications, this is the list of the applications that basically are not limited by the HidHide. So you want to add Joystick Gremlin here. I also have Flight Simulator because I'm not using Flight Simulator with the Joystick Gremlin at the moment. And all the Virpil software in my case, because I want naturally Virpil software to be able to see the physical controllers. Once you're done with that one, again, you can close the window. And once the vJoy and HidHide are running, we can get to the Joystick Gremlin. So this is the basic window that we use for the configuration. Here, at this moment, you really want to just make sure that you have a new profile that you start configuring, and you want to also save the profile. So let's just add test profile. And this is really important. You can imagine that I have quite a few buttons here, and I have quite good routine with configuring Star Citizen. So I don't mind configuring it once every patch comes out or something like that. That's okay. But there's no chance that I'm going to go through the Joystick Gremlin configurations that often. So make sure that you have the backup of your profile file, save it on your computer, save it on the cloud, save it on the moon base, just in case a meteor strike, anything, guard it with your life. Just make sure that you keep it, because it takes much longer to go through all this stuff, especially if you have anywhere near the amount of controllers that I have. Then at basic stuff, good to know, here's just loading the profile, and the activating profile. So once you're done with the configuration and ready to start the game, you click this to activate, so that works. It doesn't work when it's not on. But one great thing here is that you can always Alt-Tab away from the game, make any changes to your configuration, and then activate it again and get back to the game after saving. Then these tabs are all the controllers that Joystick Gremlin sees on your computer. So you don't have to worry about the vJoy devices in this case with these tabs or settings or plugins at this moment. This is just basic stuff we're going through. But what you want to worry about are all your physical controllers. So let's say I would like to, for example, assign something to my Constellation Alpha that I have on my right hand. I have this red button here. If I press it, first I need to actually take this activation off. Then I press the red button and it highlights the button that it actually is. Now I'm going to decide what I want to happen when I press this red button. I go here, make sure the remap is selected and click add. Now I have a list of devices. I can select the vJoy device and the button. For example, in this case, it's the button 12, so I want to assign vJoy button 12 here. And when I press this, the game sees that I pressed the vJoy device 1, button 12. That's simple. Okay, then I press this another black button here. That's button 6. In this case, I actually would like to map to a keyboard. I just select the map to keyboard, click add, record keys, and then press, for example, B. Now it's mapped to the key B, and in many cases, for example, if I would just like to use the default keybinds, for example, with Star Station, that might be useful. That can be done. Same thing with the axis. If I pull the joystick, it's the y-axis, and push it sideways is the x-axis. Let's say I want to remap the x-axis. Again, select remap, select add, select the device, and select the axis. That's it. This is the basic configuration that you're going through for all your buttons and axes you have. Again, here's the X and Y rotation that come from the thumb, basically the thumb joystick that I have on my Virpil Constellation Alpha. So I could remap them. For example, the X rotation, I am just choosing vJoy device 1 and X rotation. It just helps if you use the same numbers, but that's not necessary. You can use any axis you want to. And while you're configuring axis, you can also make changes to the curves. For example, in this case, I have my x-axis here. I'm just going to select response curve, add, and I can make any changes I want to the curves. For example, I'm just adding one here in the middle. I can also use these numbers to make sure that it's exactly in the middle, and just make it a little less steeper. For example, this is something I might be using for my landing mode when I want to have more precise controls over stuff. So just in a kind of easy way, also edit the curves. Okay, that was the basic usage of Joystick Gremlin. Now I'm going to go through a few useful use cases that help you to kind of understand the software a bit deeper. First thing is the basic stuff you want to fix stuff, combining and dividing devices. Again, combining two different devices is easier if I, let's say, want to use, as I'm using, for example, my Virpil Constellation Alpha and my control panel number 2 are in the same vJoy devices. Just for the simplicity of it, I'm using it. I'm just going to go here, just finding some button, for example, button 2, remap. Make sure that I have the same vJoy device is selected and select a different button. That's as simple. And if I want to split device, it's just a basic thing. add another button remap at different vJoy devices and select the button. Then I can also build macros. That's pretty easy. I select the button that I want to start the macro, add the macro here. First, I want to add the condition. So if I want to add the condition, for example, select this action condition and add. And this macro will activate when this particular button is pressed. Don't mind this virtual. Basically, this is the right way apparently to use those, activate the macros with key press. Then I go to action and add a new action. For example, action is, let's say, vJoy button 1 press. Then I add another action, for example, pause. Let's pause for 0.5 seconds. That's how long it keeps its press. And finally add another action. Again, vJoy button 1 release. So now you have a simple macro that presses and releases the button, but you can make whatever you need here. And one use case for the macros are the latching switches. Normally, if you're building your button boxes, I wouldn't recommend using latching switches that stay in one position when you turn them. Instead, using spring-loaded that return, because that acts as a basic button and games usually support those better. But in some cases, you actually might have controllers that already have those latching switches, especially win-wing throttlers, for example, they have a lot of those. Or you might just want to build your own controllers with latching switches for some particular reason. Like in my case, I want to have this status indicator lights, no particular use, just for fun. In that case, I actually have this connected to my Leo Bodner BBI64. So it's pretty simple. This is 1-1 or on switch. So basically, both sides just make it some key to be pressed. So when I flick this up, it actually highlights the key 7. And in this case, instead of game keeping the button 7 pressed all the time, I actually, in this case, most of the games, for example with Star Citizen, I wanted to just send a quick key press. So again, I'm going to adding macro, condition, container, action container, add. When the virtual button is pressed, I want to have a specific vJoy button pressed here. So just selecting all these vJoy device 1 button 1 press. Wait for a while. I don't know how long. I'm just usually 0.1 seconds. I don't know why. Just something I use. And again, vJoy button release. So this way you can actually have this work as a key press instead of short key press, instead of keeping a key pressed all the time. Another case of latching switches and macros is the Virpil Flip Trigger, and I guess some other joystick might have this too. So in this case, the logic with the Virpil Flip Trigger is so that when the flip trigger is up, the button 1 is pressed, and when the flip trigger is down, it's depressed. I actually have changed this around in Virpil software. Most likely it doesn't matter at all. It just feels more logical for me. So again, what I have here, I have button 1 and condition. So in this case, I have actually 2 conditions. When the button is pressed and when the button is released. In this case, I'm using keyboard key M that I have bound for the missile mode, simply because I could actually quickly reach to the key if this would get out of sync. And that's the issue at the moment. I'm really hoping that CIG will implement separate bindings for missile mode on and off, so there wouldn't be kind of worry about it getting out of sync. It can happen. It actually hasn't ever happened to me, at least in combat, but it could happen. But what this does is basically when I pull the flip trigger down, it presses the key M shortly, which is bound to the missile mode, and starts the missile mode on, and the button 2 is actually what launches the missiles. And when I flip the flip trigger up, since I have the condition here also, that activate condition when it's also released, then it also again presses the M quickly, and this way I can actually control missile mode with the flip trigger. Okay, beyond basic axis control, you can do some interesting stuff like split axis. So in this case, I could split this axis into kind of two different axes. So when I'm, for example, pushing the joystick to the left side, it actually would control one vJoy device, and to the right side another vJoy device. Or I could actually combine merge axes. So in this case, I could actually add two different axes. This is something that people who are using, for example, racing pedals might use, is that one pedal is throttle forward and one pedal throttle backward, but they will combine or merge those axes into one vJoy axis. So then bind it to the throttle forward and backward. Or just kind of simple case, I could remap this axis to button 1 and go to the virtual button and select, for example, that when the axis is at minimum 0.0, so halfway to the 1, the fully, then it just presses a button. Okay, then there's kind of this small fun use case, because for example, my Virpil Constellation Alpha has this thumbstick that is actually a joystick. I can actually use it as a mouse. So let's add this map to mouse, motion, and then because this is X, we select the X-axis, and then you can just fine-tune this minimum and maximum speed. Then with wide rotation, map to mouse, motion, and in this case Y-axis. And finally we're kind of figuring out, okay, this is button 1, I already have map to mouse button, left mouse button. And when I just turn the on, this basically controls the mouse, as you can see, really slowly, so you might want to you really want to fine tune the mouse speed here. And then last use case that is really powerful, especially if you have limited amount of buttons yourself, and there are the modes. For example, I personally have two separate modes. This is not that important gameplay wise, it's just fun. One mode is basic combat mode, which just changes so that my trigger actually works with the guns and basically joystick turns red. That's something I do with the Virpil software at the moment. And landing mode, which again changes the curves, so it won't be as sensitive and it makes fine tuning easier. But basically with these modes you could build something like mining mode, where you have your joystick to control the mining laser power, while it normally controls something else. So the way the modes mode, you go here, tools, and manage modes. The basic idea here is that you have default mode, and then you can add another mode. Let's say mode 1, and make sure its parent is default mode. And let's add mode 2. Here. Now I have 3 modes. I have the default mode and then 2 modes, which the parent is the default mode. And this is really useful since you can configure the default mode, and the mode 1 and 2 inherits basically the parent mode's controllers. So you don't have to bind all those controls again. You can bind only the ones that you want actually to change. Then when you have all the modes, you select the mode 1 and make the changes for the mode. And come back to the default. There are quite a few ways to change modes, and for example, cycle mode is pretty simple. You can add different modes that it cycles. So here it just would basically cycle all the modes from pressing one button. That's quite simple. You could also have temporary mode switch, which should be, I actually had previously had some issues with this. It might be because I didn't know how to use it, so this basically just should switch the mode as long as you press the key. Or just switch mode, and this is basically the most simple way. Switch mode and add. So with the basic certain button, it just switches the mode. So here you have it, the basic guide of Joystick Gremlin. Let me know what you liked it. So if you would like to see these guides in the future too, I'm happy to make those if people just want to watch those. And anyway, thanks for watching and see you next time.